Hey everybody! I wanted to go through how I made this nifty little sandwich envelope for myself. It's made of all natural materials, so if I accidentally drop it somewhere on a hike or something, I will be happy to know that it will just decompose. So that's great. Um, I really like using these. They don't leave a gross plastic taste, which I notice sometimes when I use like plastic baggies or even reusable plastic baggies. And it also saves money on buying Ziploc bags and stuff. So that's why I wanted to make this, and I wanted to show everyone else how to make them because they're really easy, and I pretty much made this entire thing out of scrap materials that I just have laying around. So you're going to need some cotton canvas material. I have this just laying around. You're going to need some beeswax, a natural fiber paintbrush, some twine or ribbon or whatever you've got, some needle and thread, sewing machine optional, a pot, preferably an old pot that you don't care about, and if you want to dye your fabric, you'll want some things to dye it with. I use berries and some salt. So let's get started. First thing I do is I trace some bread on a piece of paper because that's the standard size I want it to be, is for a piece of bread for my sandwich. So here I'm just cutting a big rectangle around my bread in a size so that all the edges will fold over the bread nicely and everything will be covered. So I've cut it out and there it is. So now I'm going to put my little mock sandwich, just 3 pieces of bread in the middle. Or I guess I'm using 1 piece of bread here. But I like to use 3 pieces of bread because then it's the actual thickness of a sandwich if you're going to be measuring. But here I'm just eyeballing it, so it's okay. Yeah, and I just use a washable marker. Oh yeah, here's the 3 pieces of bread. I just use a washable marker to trace everything. And then once you do the bath for the fabric, it'll wash away. Okay, so here I'm going to just hem the edges of the fabric. Because it's canvas, it has a tendency to fray pretty badly. So you're definitely going to want to hem it. Here I'm just pinning the edges. You can look up a billion tutorials on YouTube on how to hem. It's pretty easy. Just look at the edges of your clothes and you'll get the idea on how to do it. So that's what I'm going to do. I get my canvas from art supply stores actually, because they use canvas to make, obviously, artist canvases. But this particular canvas I'm using is really thin, and I didn't get it from an art supply store. It's actually part of some old IKEA furniture, which may not be the healthiest idea. Like, who knows what kind of chemicals they might have put on it. But you know what? It's just for me. So if I were to sell it, I would get some actual good canvas. So just a little word of warning there, I guess. Yeah. Okay, so in this part, you're going to do the dye bath for the fabric, and you're going to want to use a 1/2 cup of salt per 8 cups of water. So you can, reduce or make this bigger depending how much fabric you have. And this is optional. Again, if you don't want to dye your fabric, you don't have to. You can just have it be white, but I'm going to dye mine. So there's my salt going in, and I'm just going to use a spoon to stir it up. So I just stirred it until the salt was completely dissolved. Now I'm going to put my fabric in the bath and just mush it down so that everything is soaked inside. And I even like to take a plate, a small dinner plate, and put it in there just to weigh it down for a few minutes so that everything gets nice and waterlogged before I put it on the stove. Alright, you're going to want to put your fabric on the stove on a simmer for 1 hour in the salt water. And again, this is to prep the fabric for dyeing, so this is optional if you don't want to dye your fabric. So after my fabric's been simmering, I dump it out into the sink and I let it cool a bit. And then I wring out all the water, just like that. Just make sure you let it cool or else you might burn your hands. And now I'm going to cut some berries. It's important to cut the berries instead of throw them in whole because that skin is pretty protective of the juices, and the juices are what you want. Also, you're kind of increasing the surface area of juice and color you can get out of these berries. So it's really important to cut them. The smaller pieces, the better. It's pretty hard to cut these blueberries. And this is a great use of old berries that kind of get forgotten in your fridge. I know that happens in my family. We go through lots of berries and sometimes they get shoved into the back of the fridge and then you look and they're all wrinkly and they have a little bit of white stuff on them and no one's going to eat that. So this is a really good use for those old berries instead of just throwing them out. Alright, so I'm going to now just put the berries in my pot. This is the same pot I used earlier. I'm using the same pot for everything because it's I just got this pot at Goodwill actually for a few bucks. And that's a great way to get a nice little old pot to use for this. And I used a ratio of 1 part berries to 2 part water for getting the dye ready. Okay, so here I'm just going to put it on the oven. You're going to want to boil the berries and then let them simmer for an hour. And please excuse the dinner going on. That has nothing to do with the dyeing process. Alright, so now the berries have simmered and boiled, and I'm going to pour it through a colander and get all those juices separated from the berry pulp grossness. And I'll dump that in the sink, in the garbage disposal, and then keep the juice. And I put the juice back in the pot and give my fabric a nice soak. So there I'm putting my fabric in and making sure that it gets nice and soaked. And make sure to put a note on your pot while it's sitting overnight. My family tends to get into things that I don't want them to, so that's a good idea. Alright, so now my fabric has sat overnight and I am going to wring out the excess berry juice dye stuff. It's a good idea to wear gloves during this. I didn't because I don't really have gloves. So it's a good idea if you have them to not dye your hands and make sure you don't get it on your clothes. I'm wearing a black t-shirt so I didn't really care. Also, use your crappy sink in your house. Don't use your nice bathroom sink. This is our laundry room sink, so that's what I'm doing. Run it under a little bit of water. I don't think you want to run it under too much water. Then again, I'm not an expert on this, so maybe you do. So yeah, I'm just laid it on top of the pot and letting it dry. Now I'm going to wax the fabric. This is my favorite part. The way I do it, I use my brush and I heat my little pot there and I melt some wax. You'll want to have the burner on simmer, otherwise the wax will start to boil and it'll pop and hit your arms and it hurts. So I'm just brushing the wax onto the fabric. I don't know if this is the best way to do it, but this is the way I like to do it. And it seems to be pretty quick. So I'm just brushing it on. I want to cover all the area with wax. And you can see the beginning of my brush stroke is pretty thick, so you want to keep that in mind when you're brushing it on. Make sure that you don't layer too much in one place, otherwise it's going to be hard to melt into the fabric later. There's another way to do this where you can just shave off chips of beeswax, lay it on your fabric and then put it in the oven and let it melt into the fabric that way. But because my oven is so big, I feel like that's kind of a waste of space. So I just like doing it this way. So just brushing it on. Okay, so now my favorite part, using my hairdryer on high and angling it over my beeswax. And Doing this will let you melt the wax into the fabric. And I put the wax on the fabric to make it waterproof so that if my sandwich is soggy, it's not going to make my bag soggy and it's not going to leak. And also if, you know, something gets wet in my backpack, it won't make my sandwich wet. So it's a good idea. I always put it on the inside as well. You can see the inside of the hem on the edges of the fabric there, and that's because I'm putting the wax on the inside where it's going to be touching the sandwich. And I also think this probably protects you from any treatment the company who made the canvas might have made. And you can see that the wax does a really good job of waterproofing your fabric. Okay, so now I'm going to cut 2 little holes on the long end in the middle of my fabric to string my string through. So I cut the first hole and then I cut the second hole. Now I'm pulling my leather string through. And this helps keep the string in place so when I open my sandwich bag, the string's not going to fall off and I'm not going to lose it. And then I tie 2 knots on the ends of the strings so that they don't come back through the hole and fall out. And then that's how I keep the whole thing closed. So that's what I do. This was kind of an improvised way of doing it. I wasn't sure how I was going to do this part, so I'm glad it worked out, and it works pretty good. I just pull on the strings and it almost kind of closes itself, which is cool. So here I'm just showing how I'm opening it. You don't have to only fit sandwiches in here too. I fit a quesadilla in here the other day. Here I'm just showing how you can put different shaped things in here and it'll still work more or less. And you can see that pulling the strings just lets you close it up and then you just give it a nice little double knot. And I recommend using this leather string that I get. I got it at Hobby Lobby. I think it's just a bunch of scraps from some leather factory. They're extremely useful. I recommend anyone to get them because I use them whenever I need any kind of string, and they're really strong. So yeah, there's me putting the sandwich back in and tying it. And that's that. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you get a chance to make one of these because it's very fun and very rewarding. Thank you so much.